Well, good evening. I'm just going to take a minute, introduce myself, and just say thank you for being here. My name is Larry Grayway, pastor of Kennesaw Family Life Church, and we've partnered with Heather with the Green Phoenix to put this on tonight. It's a really important discussion, so we're really glad that you're here. This is Suicide Awareness Month, and so we want to have a discussion around a topic that can make people uncomfortable. Very difficult. I think everybody in the room on some level has either had a loved one or a friend or a relative that has struggled with it or maybe even died by suicide at some point. So this discussion, the whole idea of this is to remove some of the stigma, to open up a conversation and allow us to be able to have healthy discussions so that we can, one, know how to help people, and two, maybe if we're struggling in that way, realize that we're not alone, that there are resources that we can use that are safe. Because I think a lot of times we feel like we're not safe. And that if we share what we're really feeling, that people are going to think different of us, or we might end up in a place we don't want to end up, whatever that may be. So this discussion is really centered around it. We have some panelists that are here. I'm going to let them kind of explain who they are, why they're here, and what their role is, and then we're going to just ask some questions. And we want to encourage you to ask questions as well. And if there's something that you want to share, something that's maybe a resource that you have or a question that you have, that you could ask that question. I'm going to kind of moderate, so I'll be kind of around and get there. We are also... you don't have to go onto a microphone, but we are going to record some of this. We may use it on a podcast later. Heather and I do a podcast twice a month that, first, third, and fifth Wednesdays. So yes, we do a podcast. It's around mental health, recovery, and growth in those areas. So if you're interested in that, we have information with the Green Phoenix stuff back there. And I'm going to let our panelists kind of share. We're going to start with Stephanie because you're right next to me. You have your microphone. Can you just tell us who you are, what you do, and why we have you here?
Sure. This is heavy. Hello.
You got it?
Hello.
There we go. Keep going. It'll be there.
Okay, so my name is Stephanie Marshall. I have a baby voice, so if you can't hear me, tell me, and I'll talk louder. I'm a licensed professional counselor, so I currently work with Mind and Body Christian Health Group. We're located in Kennesaw, Georgia, and I'm in the therapy department, but we also have a direct primary care department, and we have 2 licensed massage therapists on staff, as well as a trauma-informed yoga instructor, and we're kind of hoping to include a dietitian on our team as well. So we're called Mind and Body because we really try to treat our clients holistically. So we do a lot of functional medicine, and then what I do is kind of general therapy for children kind of ages 3 and 99 plus, and work with things like depression, anxiety, trauma, marriage, grief, what else? Behavioral issues, school stuff, you name it, I probably treat it in some way. And I have been fully licensed since 2017, but practicing since 2014. And then I'm married and have 3 beautiful children. So that's a little bit about me.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Great. All right, Heather, kind of share who you are and why we have you here, your background. Go for it.
Questions I hate the most. How are you doing? And tell me about yourself.
Yes, exactly.
My name is Heather Crouse. I am a suicide attempt survivor. And most people, one of the things I really want to change is the language. A lot of times when you hear suicide survivor, they're only referring to lost survivors, whereas they call us attempters. Like, by golly, next time you'll do better. Because that is how it feels. I am not an attempter, I am a survivor. I have been trying to do stuff like this for a while. I was a certified peer specialist. Technically, I still am, but I don't keep it up because I don't want to work in the field. I want to work with people in the general public to help them gain a better understanding of what mental health is. Okay. Raise your hand if you have mental health. Every hand should be up. Some of us are also living with mental illness. They are not the same thing.
That's true.
I also want to help people recognize that suicide is not a dirty word. We need to talk about it, we need to be open about it, and we need to share our experiences. And so I got people that are smarter than me to come out here and give their perspectives too.
But not funnier.
That's true. Not funnier. Did you say funnier looking or fun? No, I love Heather. I've known Heather for quite a while now. So, all right. Sergeant Mead, will you just share with us a little bit?
Testing. Hello, I'm Sergeant Matthew Mead, Kennesaw Police Department. I've been a police officer for just a little over 15 years now. And I'm kind of here to give you guys a perspective on what it's like for a police officer when we respond to incidents involving people who are experiencing a crisis. I am a crisis intervention trained police officer. I've had several courses on de-escalation and interview techniques, calming techniques, and just classes on how to get people to open up to you and share their feelings and share their thoughts. I'm also kind of going to jump in here and there and maybe provide some type of, maybe legal perspectives, specifically pertaining to like what a police officer can do while remaining within the boundaries of the Constitution without violating anybody's rights, and maybe offer some resources as well. So if any point in time any legal question comes up or anything like that, please feel free to just jump right in and we can open that discussion up as well too. Larry?
We did have a fourth panelist that was supposed to be here, which was somebody that's a lost survivor, somebody that's lost a loved one, family member, whatever that is. She had an emergency with her work and could not make it tonight. I may fill in some of that. I lost my brother. I think it was in 2003. It's been a long time ago, so I have to go back and remember that. But my brother died by suicide back in 2003, so I may share a little bit of that experience as well. So we want to cover all the different bases and make sure that we have an opportunity to think about this from all perspectives. I'm a chaplain with the police department. That's actually how Sergeant Mead and I met several years ago. And I know through talking to different officers that coming off of COVID and through the time since we went through lockdown and everything else, domestic violence, suicide, all of those things have gone up in our community. The rates are higher than ever, I think. It's pretty unprecedented time with that. So that's what makes this discussion so important. So I thank everybody for being here today. I thank you for coming and being a part of this discussion. So the first thing I want to ask, I want to come at it from the perspective with Heather. I want to start with you. And you shared a little bit of the story of what you're trying to do with the Green Phoenix, and this is your brainchild. A lot of the artwork that's back here, these masks and things are from Heather. She's used art as a part of her own recovery process. She's got a couple books back there. I'm going to start with Heather on this because I want to hear the perspective of somebody that's coming to the point of attempting. What are you thinking? Where are you at? And what are some of the emotions and thoughts that you're going through? Because we hear the stories of people saying, well, that's just such a selfish action. And I realize that everybody is at a different place when they get to that point. But I'm not going to ask for a raising of hands, but I know that there are people in this room, you may not have attempted, maybe you have, and I don't know it, and that's fine. But I know that there are people in this room that thought has crossed your mind. And there may be some things that you resonate with, and there are going to be some people on the other side that really don't understand that. I'm going to tell you, I'm somebody it's a far thought from me. That's not something I've ever wrestled with. So to have empathy towards somebody that's struggling with that, it's hard for me to understand sometimes. So hearing these conversations help me to be able to know how to respond and how to have empathy and how to respond. So Heather, if you don't mind, share a little bit of your story and kind of some of the things that you've been through to get to that point.
I can't tell you how old I was the first time I attempted. It was fairly superficial, so while the intent was there, the action wasn't as significant. The last major attempt that I had was a little over 12 years ago. I'd been building up for a while. I don't remember exactly how it started, but the breaking point was losing my dog. He was a week shy of 19 months old. Not years. He didn't even make it to his second birthday. He had been sick for a few months. I'd take him to the vet. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He kept getting sicker. Turned out he had a bowel obstruction that perforated. And then by the time they found it, he had 4 inches of necrotic bowel. They were able to get rid of that, and he survived a few more months. I came home one night, and he was throwing up everywhere. I took him to the vet, found out he had pancreatitis, and they would not tell me he was going to be okay. So I was prepared, but not really prepared to lose him. The night that he passed away, I can't explain it. I was sitting on a couch, and the lyrics, how will I go on without you? How will I live without you? How will I breathe without you? Kept going in a loop on my head. I got in my car. I drove to the local crisis center. This was in Colorado. I could not speak. And people who have seen me in this phase can attest to this. I get really stressed. I am not able to verbally communicate at all. When I pulled into the parking lot and rang the door, the first gentleman came out, didn't know me, recognized something was going on, was trying to talk to me. Unfortunately, his coworker came out and our relationship made oil and water look compatible. She looked at me and said, "We're busy tonight. We don't have time to play games with you. You need to go home or I'm calling the police." So I did. I went home, crawled into bed, fell asleep at some point, and the only reason I know I fell asleep is the next morning the vet called and woke me up, and I got confirmation that he was gone. I drove to the vet's office. It was a Sunday morning. They already had him wrapped up. I took his baby blanket so that he could be buried with it. Cried until I had no tears left, and as I was crying, I realized I had nothing left. Now, a key difference between now and 12 years ago is 12 years ago, I didn't have a functional support system. I went home. I took close to a 90-day supply of Klonopin, about 15 Flexerol that I had, and as much of a random beer that I had in my refrigerator, because I don't drink, still not really sure why I was there. Beer is gross. I left. Yeah, you might want to block your ears so I don't get arrested like 12 years later for DUI.
Oh no, it's just the beer is gross. I don't know about that.
I grabbed my keys and my wallet because the apartment building I lived in, you had to have a card key to get in. But I left my phone on the table. I got in my car and I was planning to drive to the river trail where we used to hike together with the intention of jumping in the river so no one would have to clean up the body. At the last minute, I decided to turn right instead of left, drove myself to PetSmart, and to this day I'm very thankful that I did not wreck my car. When I got there, the manager noticed something was off. They weren't open yet. She asked one of her employees to go ahead and call 911 and came out to talk to me. In my mind, I thought I handed her my keys and my wallet, asked her to clean out my apartment so my family wouldn't have to take care of it, please sell off my possessions, pay off any outstanding debts, and then donate the rest to an animal shelter. Apparently what actually happened is I garbled a few words and passed out. I got a nice little trip to the emergency room where they did an EEG to verify I had brain function, which some would still question. Spent the next 2 days on a ventilator. And when they came, I could have been discharged that day had I talked to the psychiatrist, but I couldn't. So instead they sent me off to the psych unit where I spent the next 4 months in and out of because I was not doing well. Now, if you fast forward to last year, November 5th was the last time I seriously contemplated ending my own life. Thankfully, that day I had two amazing people who were more stubborn than I am, who refused to leave my side.
That's true.
And because they know the trauma history with the hospital, they gave me the choice, and I went semi-voluntarily. Unfortunately, it was not a good experience. Fast forward a month later, I had an amazing doctor who went to the hospital with me due to some poor coping skills. Granted, that's not why we ended up in the emergency room that night. Asthma sucks. But because I had fresh cuts, they were going to try to do it again, but she advocated for me, and now I really like her.
We were released. 4:30 in the morning.
Yes. So that's kind of a brief history of my story.
So I want to, and I thank you for sharing that. You've been very open with it, and this is something that you've shared more than just one time, and I appreciate that. What I really want to, and I don't want to go back to anything that's difficult for you. You can say, "Hey, I'm out, tap out," and that's fine. We know, we've heard your story on kind of some events that have led up to that. You and I, in the podcast, you've talked about that point where you don't like the term committed suicide because you feel like it's like committing a crime. But when you come to a point where you're wanting to end your own life, everything naturally in you fights against that. Can you tell us a little bit about that point? What kind of mental state are you in to come to a point where you're like, hey, I'm going to take this step and do this?
The one thing to understand is every time you get to that point, it's a little bit easier to cross that barrier. And that's what scares me the most. Thankfully, I'm in a lot better place than I was even a year ago. But you're right. It's not an easy decision. You are fighting against every natural instinct you have to stay alive. But when you get to that point, you really don't see any other options. I didn't want to die. I just didn't see how I could continue living. In my mind, my death was going to be a relief to those around me. It was going to be a release of the burden, a release of the pain, a release of all the anger and frustration, not within myself, but those around me. The key difference between 12 years ago and last year is that now I have a support system that can see what I'm going through. I don't have to tell them because they can tell without me saying a word. And I can reach out, and I feel more comfortable reaching out. I really want to believe I am past suicidal thoughts, that I am past poor coping skills, which, for the record, cutting and suicide are not the same thing. One is a really unhealthy coping mechanism that is about regaining control. Suicide is releasing control.
Okay. Thank you, Heather, for sharing that. I want to shift over to Stephanie for just a second, then we're going to jump over to Sergeant Meade. Stephanie, when you, and I know in your line of work, you run across people that are struggling, like what you've heard Heather struggle. When you come across somebody that is at that point, what are some things that you could help us on this side that's maybe dealing with somebody in our life, maybe a family member or a friend? What are some things that you could say that would speak to that, tools that we can use, maybe some of your own experience? And I know you're familiar with some assessments and things, but can you give us a little bit of perspective on how we can help somebody that's in a position of where Heather's been multiple times?
Yeah, so I think I think suicide has become kind of this taboo thing, right, that we don't want to talk about. So it's similar to like if you have a friend who has had a family member that's died, it's like people don't know what to say, right? We don't know how to comfort. And so I think part of it is just being comfortable, being uncomfortable, talking about it with them, and being very curious. I think also we think like if we ask the wrong question, it's gonna, like, there's no turning back. And so I think it's not being afraid to kind of ask and be curious, like I said, and sometimes just having, I think you talked a lot about support and how important it is to have support. And so really being curious about how can I be a support to you and what would that look like, and giving them some confidence that you're there for them even when it gets really tough. And then from the counseling perspective, I think even for clinicians, there can be a lot of anxiety because we're trained from a very ethical in the legality of suicide, and so it can create a lot of anxiety of like, what questions should I ask, and should I use a formal assessment, or do I need to send my client to the hospital? And it can create this anxiety that I think unintentionally creates like a power struggle in the therapy room. And so if anyone here has children or has ever been around a child, right? I have a 2-year-old, and we call her a Sour Patch Kid because she's very sweet, and then we'll like kick you in the shins, and it's like, what happened? But if she's in the bathtub, right, and she's splashing water everywhere, and it's getting all over the walls, which she has done before, right? And if I tell her, if you do that again, we got to get out of the bathtub, right? She's probably going to splash again, and probably a bigger splash, right? And it's a similar dynamic in the therapy room when there's this anxiety on the clinician side of, if you follow through on killing yourself or having these thoughts to kill yourself, I'm going to have to send you to the hospital. So don't do it, right? And so from my perspective, it's been really helpful to have an assessment that we use it's called CAMS. We love acronyms in the therapy world. Everything has an acronym. It stands for, what does it stand for? Collaborative Assessment and Managing Suicide Risk Assessment for something. You can fact check me. What I really like about it is that it's collaborative. So we know research is very clear that like the number one thing that influences change in the therapy room is the therapeutic alliance, or the relationship that you have between the counselor and the client. Above CBT, all the acronyms, right? CBT, DBT, EMDR, psychedelics is kind of the latest and greatest. Above all of those things, the therapeutic relationship is the number one thing. So having a support system is what elicits change. So what CAMS does is it's collaborative in the sense that you even sit right next to the client when you're filling out this assessment. So it's kind of like a first date where therapy, even pre-COVID, you would be 6 feet apart and there's kind of a formality to it, versus the people that like sit next to each other in the booth at the restaurant. That's what CAMS does. So you sit right next to the client, and it's essentially saying, I hear that you have this problem or this issue, and you've come to the conclusion that killing yourself is the only way to solve this problem. What if during our time together, we tried to figure out if there's another way to solve that problem. And so it's supportive and collaborative. And the feedback that I've gotten really often from my clients is that it's nice to have a confidence in a plan, and that it gives them hope. When you take that clinician anxiety out of the door, and basically I'm saying, I don't want you to go to the hospital. If we can keep you out of the hospital, that would be awesome. And so, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. I mean, to an extent. Heather, did you have something you wanted to say?
Thank you. Because the hospital sucks. They treat you like you're less than human. And so I appreciate that you understand that and are willing to sit next to somebody. Although if we ever have to do it, can we not sit next to each other like that?
You guys, you brought up a good point. As a clinician, you're trying to find a solution to keep from taking that step of going to the hospital, getting to that point. You're trying to figure some things out. You've mentioned support system. Heather has mentioned multiple times that a hospital hasn't been a great experience. And there are times, and I'll be honest, we've come to this point, and Heather already had shared this, that there are sometimes coming to a place where it's necessary for somebody's safety. And I shared that story when we came in. One of the hardest decisions that you'll ever make as a support person or a clinician or an officer is taking that step to take somebody to the hospital.
Involuntarily.
Yeah, involuntarily. We had such a relationship with Heather. I've known Heather for going on 6 years now and have walked a lot of roads with her. Came to a point where I knew that there was nothing I could do. She gave me the permission to do that. Even if she hadn't, we probably would have ended up there anyway. Now, here was the other side of that coin. I knew that was not the safest place for her, so I followed up with her and was able to get her out of the hospital the next day when I knew she was stabilized. But that's a hard place to come to make that decision. And I'm going to share with you just a little bit from my experience, and I want to jump over to Sergeant Meade in just a minute. But from my experience, if you have a relationship with somebody and if you've been in a support system, it's not when they're out of control that the hospital is necessary, when they're frantic and all that kind of stuff. It's when they've become calm and everything's okay. It seems like they've come into this place where, oh, I'm good now. I'm fine. That's because they've already resolved in their mind, this is what I'm going to do. And they've got a plan. You've heard about the plans probably. And they come to a place where, now I've got this all figured out. That's when I become scared. That's when I become concerned and say, hey, we need to take another step. If they're frantic and processing through those things, they're not to that point yet. Is that pretty accurate from those? Yeah. And so I wanted to put that out there. Go ahead, Heather.
The reason is because once you have that resolution, you know that you're done. So there is a sense of peace and finality because you know that soon things are going to be over. And so when you're frantic, it is because you're still fighting. But once you have that resolution, you have the plan, you have the intention, you know exactly how you're going to do it. You just got to get rid of other people so that you can follow through with it unless they're really stubborn. And I can't say thank you enough for being stubborn. Just don't expect me to repeat it.
I'm gonna just jump in real quick because I noticed that you'd mentioned that sense of peace. But before we get to that, Dr. Taylor had mentioned that taking someone to the hospital against their will usually involves some type of police involvement, and it's not a peaceful situation. It may look and appear violent to someone who's hasn't seen anything like that or experienced anything like that in the past. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the legality of what, as a police officer, what I need to have happen, or what the facts and circumstances have to be for me to legally be able to do that. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But I also wanted to kind of ask a question to Stephanie, because I heard Heather tell her story many times, and tonight I kind of picked up on something that I didn't really maybe notice before. And as police officers, we're trained to like pay attention to these things. And she had mentioned like that sense of peace, right? And when you were in Colorado, you had given away your stuff and you cleaned your apartment out so you wouldn't have to be a burden to anybody else. I think one of the things as a police officer I would like to learn a little bit more about are some of them red flags that happen before the police are called, like giving away personal belongings and a sense of peace, because now someone's come up with a plan and they've decided this is what I'm going to do, and now I feel calm about it. So what are some of the other things that I can talk to, like a family member? If I go to a person in crisis call, I can talk to the family members about these things and say, hey, this might be something you might want to look out for in the future.
Yeah, so usually people that are contemplating suicide will, like if you think about someone who's depressed, typically, they may be kind of low energy or fatigued easily, or not motivated, maybe not showering, just a depressed mood, right? So what we look for is kind of a really drastic switch where they're almost not manic by any means, but just kind of happy, a lighter affect would be kind of where it feels really drastic and a quick switch. Giving away possessions, writing letters. So sometimes people will write a suicide letter, but even kind of maybe connecting with loved ones and telling them, messages, almost, like if someone were on their deathbed, that would be a warning sign. Those are kind of the main.
Okay, yeah, that's good for me to know, because like if I talk to a family member who is going through something like that, I can ask questions like, how has their hygiene been? Have they been energetic? Or have they been at peace?
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. That's going to add to my knowledge.
So basically what I'm hearing is if we got family members that have been going through depression, maybe you see it, teenagers, whoever that is, and Heather's pointed this out recently, probably one of the highest unreported area of suicide is among our elderly. So when you come to this place where you're staying in contact with somebody and you see these massive swings, that may be a cue to find out a little bit more, to spend a little bit more time to do. Look, none of us are saviors. We could do all of this right and that person still take that step. But they don't have a chance if we're not in part of their life. And I think that connection point, if there's one thing that, I'm a pastor, so I'll bring spiritual side into it. One of the things that I think has been the most drastic thing over the last couple of years is the isolation.
Mm-hmm.
God created us to be in relationship with other people. And there's been fear and all this other stuff. And that's why, with the police department, all of the calls, domestic violence, all those things are up because the isolation has created some mental health issues that were maybe lying underneath or maybe not, but it's amped up now. So Sergeant Meade, I want to ask you for just a moment, because as somebody that's there, that gets called to these scenes, I've actually been in the car with you when you've been called to these scenes. What is your number one objective when you're called? Because by the time you're called, usually, like you said, it's not a pretty thing. It can be even seem kind of violent. As an officer, what are you trained to do? What is your objective in those moments?
Well, I'm going to start off with saying that's something that might sound kind of selfish. But my main objective, no matter what I'm going to do, is self-care. I have to take care of myself before I can take care of anybody else. And I have to make sure that I go home at the end of the day. But when my secondary concern is always for the well-being of the people that I'm going to serve. Whether that means convincing somebody to voluntarily go to a hospital, whether that means taking somebody to hospital against their will, or whether that means taking someone to jail because they've committed a crime that the severity of the crime is just, I can't turn a blind eye to that. So your question was, what was my main concern? So I guess that kind of answers that with kind of a priority type. Taking care of other people is.
So you get a call from maybe a spouse or a parent or or even a child and says, "Hey, mom's going to take her life," or I'm really afraid, or whatever that situation may be. When you get to that house or wherever you're at, your number one objective, obviously, you want to make sure the scene is safe for you and everybody that's around you.
Right.
So what are some tools that you use to try and take care of those situations?
Well, so obviously one of the first things we try to do is build a rapport. Have a conversation. And it doesn't have to be about anything in particular, just a conversation. Something to build a rapport, something that I can find common ground, something that both parties in the conversation have a vested interest in. Using conversation, we can lead into questions that can help me determine what type of resources I need to help this person best. In many cases, we want people to voluntarily go to the hospital or go see a doctor on their own. For a police officer to forcibly take somebody against their will, it's called a 1013, and we need a couple of things in place for that to happen. So sometimes some of the questions that I may have to ask are incriminating in nature about maybe a crime. So kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, the legality of taking someone against their will as a police officer, I have to have two things that are in place. One, I have to have probable cause that a person is suffering from mental illness. And for those of you who don't know what probable cause is, you see this term tossed around on TV all the time. It is very simple. Facts and circumstances that would lead a reasonable and prudent person to believe that this person has some type of mental illness. And the second thing that I need to have in place is that a crime has to have been committed. So, and that can be any crime. Jaywalking is a crime. So, if I have them two things in place, I can take somebody to the doctor myself. And that's called a 1013. Sometimes it can be violent, sometimes it can be peaceful. It all depends on that rapport that you build with the person that you're responding to help in the first place. How does that conversation go? Are they completely shut out? Sometimes it takes, I can tell you, a couple days ago, I had to talk to a guy for almost 45 minutes before he would even say a word to me. So sometimes it takes time.
Well, good. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to share just a little bit, like I told you guys at the beginning, and some of you guys came in later. We had somebody else scheduled for tonight that was somebody that's lost a family member, so a lost survivor. And I also shared that my brother died by suicide in 2003, I believe it was. Locked himself in a shed, turned on his motorcycle, and sat down. We still to this day don't know the circumstances to why. So I want to talk to that just for a minute, and then I want to open up the floor to some questions. And then if you guys don't have questions, I can continue to ask them, but we want the discussion to happen. From a loss survivor's perspective, I will say two things. And I watched my oldest brother. I think this deeply affected him. It changed his personality. They were closer together. I was 14 years younger than my brother that died and 16 years younger than my other brother. Those two were 2 years apart. And I think it deeply affected him to have that happen. And the regret of they didn't have a great relationship. They didn't talk very often. I think there was some regret there. For me, it was a little bit different. But what I would say to those that have lost, we always focus on the person that's struggling with depression or maybe struggling with the suicidal thoughts or have attempted. We get them the help, we get them to counselors and things like that. But I want to speak to those that are left behind. Don't be afraid to get counseling. Don't be afraid to sit down and talk and get those things out, because that's what's important. Being able to share, that's why discussions like this are really important. We want to remove the stigma of what's there and be okay with talking to somebody. There could be anger, there could be multiple things. Guilt. What if I'd have done this? Could I have done this? I missed all those signs. You could hear everything that they're telling you and still miss it.
Mm-hmm.
And so going to somebody and sitting down with somebody that can listen to you and help you process through that will help. And please do that. Make sure you take the time to do that. I want to open up the floor for just a couple minutes. Are there any questions for those of you that are with us that you would have for any of the panelists that we have up here? Some thoughts, maybe some experience that you'd like to share. Yeah, Haley.
It's not inherently a question, but you were talking about like red flags that you would want to know. I don't really know how you would go about finding this, but a lot of times people who are contemplating it, they can use something as simple as a shampoo bottle, and as soon as they run out of that shampoo, they're like, yeah, that's my last shampoo bottle. I'm going, or like a toothpaste. So they like just noticing the small things. Like I saw that like someone's mom had like bought her like a completely new like razor or shampoo bottle, anything like that, and it just like she's like, oh, gotta go through this entire shampoo bottle again. I don't know. It's just no.
I understand what you're saying.
So you're saying the little triggers, the little things in somebody's life could be. So you're talking about, and I'm saying a lot of this, reiterating because we are recording, paying close enough attention that somebody that's maybe doing that's almost like bargaining, saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to, when this happens, that's going to be the last thing. So that's what you're talking about, right? Okay.
So like I like that what you said that is like when this bottle of shampoo is gone, then I'm going to go too.
Yeah.
I'm going to relate that to Heather's dog. Because we attach ourselves to things, whether it's a bottle of shampoo or a dog. When that thing is gone, what do I have left? What am I breathing for? What's the song that you related to?
It was a country music song.
But a lot of times we assess for reasons for living. So a lot of times we look at we'll ask people what their reasons are for dying, but on the other end of the spectrum, it's reasons for living. And it could be something that feels kind of benign, like shampoo or even like finishing Breaking Bad, right? You know, that can feel like a reason to live. So that can be helpful to assess for sure.
Okay.
Sometimes people will use that because they are contemplating, and so they're trying to find reasons to hold on. So it may be, okay, well, I still have shampoo. Encourage them to shave their head.
Well, that's why I was saying
Shampoo
like
goes a
getting
lot
them like a whole new set of the thing that they relied on so much. Like Breaking Bad, like say they come out with a new season and they're like, oh, I can keep going for this last season, I think.
So one of the things that they have done in the past that could have been done a lot better, they will make you write out a safety plan. And a lot of times they don't sit down with you to write it out. And the whole idea behind it, if it's done properly, is it says, okay, well, I'm not feeling safe. What can I do to keep myself safe? And so for somebody, it may be that shampoo bottle. That's something that they can hold on to. I will tell you, one of the hardest things is not being suicidal is when you get out of the hospital. For whatever reason, people seem to think that mental illness is contagious. Pretty sure it doesn't work that way. So when you come home from the hospital, when I came home after having COVID, even though I was under quarantine, I had people reaching out, asking if I was okay, asking me if there was anything that I needed. When I got home from the psych hospital 12 years ago, people didn't want to look at me. They didn't want to talk to me. It was like they were afraid of me. And I don't know if they were afraid they were going to say the wrong thing and set me off. But it just increases that isolation. And as they mentioned, isolation is kind of bad. Kind of hate the whole connecting thing because people are hard. It's not something that comes naturally to me, but now that I have a support system in place, I understand the importance of it. So what you're talking about is I would kind of keep an eye on that. If you see somebody that seems to be really attached to something that seems relatively benign,
Or fleeting.
try to give them other things to hold on to.
It's a great conversation. Thank you, Haley, for sharing. I think you're hearing a common denominator in all of this is relationship. The more we become isolated, the less we have an opportunity to see those things. A parent doesn't know it if a parent hasn't spent time. And we don't see the signs. Part of the reason we were able to help Heather as much as we were is because we spent a lot of time with Heather. Heather's like family to us, has traveled with us, all those kind of things. So we saw those things. But you can't do it if you're not a part of somebody's life. So when you see somebody that's isolating themselves, and not everybody's social, and we get that. But everybody can come to a point where they have one or two people over a bond. I have a guy that the only reason we talk is because we ride motorcycles, but that's a connection. And so we can build relationship around that. Find places to connect with people. Any other questions as we're getting into this? That was a great comment, Haley. I think that really helps. Thoughts? I know we've got a couple pastors in the room. And
I
Yeah.
had a question.
Yeah.
What are some suggestions for the person who's feeling suicidal that's so resistant to the connection or any help, just really closed down? How would you handle that?
so you're asking for the person that's feeling that way and doesn't want those connections,
Right. How do you help that person?
how do you help that person?
I can, as a police officer, I can tell you that I have responded to many calls like that where they've just shut down, refused to even conversate with you. And sometimes it is the police officer uniform that shuts people down. In cases like that, for me, I just know not to give up. You know, even if it takes 45 minutes. You know, as police officers, we're equipped with, you know, information and cards that we can hand out. There is hope, and numbers and websites and people we can call and all types of resources that we have. But if we're not able to, like you said, engage them in some type of conversation or open them up, one of our next resources that we'll use is family members. Family members and friends, and we've already kind of discussed this as well with the relationships, that social network that people have. We'll start to reach out to those folks. We'll look in our system to see how many times have we been out with this person before. Who has came out to help us in the past? Who's this person's next of kin? How far away do they live? Do they live in Colorado? Do they live in Marietta? Can I send another officer out there to pick them up and bring them over here? Will they be more receptive to someone they're familiar with, or someone of a religious figure? I think I've even asked our chaplain here to come talk to some family members once during a crisis, or more than once probably. But so from a police officer perspective, just exhausting every resource that we possibly can. And it's unfortunate. I've had good luck. I would say in my 15, 17 years of policing, I've probably only had maybe 2 or 3 people that I just could not get through to. The key is leaving your ego at home is for a police officer. The key is leaving your ego at home and not being afraid to spend the time that you need to spend. It's a very common trait in our field that we get in, we get the job done, just the facts, ma'am, here's your case number, good night, bye, on to the next case. So as police officers, that's our main thing right there. It's for people who are completely shut down, we need to leave our ego at home and spend the time to gain ground with them.
This may sound really counterintuitive. Don't try to talk to them.
I've done that before too, yes. Sometimes that works. I've just sat in the same room with somebody before for half an hour. Was just there, and out of the blue. It was actually a couple of days ago. A 16-year-old boy.
Sometimes when people are shut down, they just need you to be there. Just be present with them. We don't need to be fixed. Unless you're a vet. Sorry, not really, but. Or instead of trying to get them to open up about what they're going on, if it's somebody that you know, find something that they're interested in and see if they'll talk about that instead of what they're going through in that moment. But honestly, sometimes you just need somebody that is too stubborn to leave you alone, because a majority of people aren't going to try to do it in front of somebody else. Whether it's ending their own life or cutting or other less than healthy coping skills. If you just sit there with them, and Stephanie put it really well, I'm probably going to butcher it, but just be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Stop trying to push through it, trying to save people or fix people, and just meet them where they're at. And realize, but also like Matt said, think about the airlines. They always tell you to put your mask on before you put it on your kids, and it's not because they don't want your kids to live, but you can't help someone if you're not able to help yourself first.
Go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, he said 16-year-old boy, and man, teenagers are tough and they don't love talking. So I've had, teenage clients that they come every week, but we sit in silence. Silence is a tool in therapy, and it's really hard to sit in a room with a kid for 45 minutes to 60 minutes sometimes and say nothing. But I've done it for like 6 or 7 sessions in a row, and then they'll, feel comfortable opening up, and it's hard. But I think knowing that you're consistent and that you're there for them, speaks volumes. And sometimes I'll pull out video games, and I've colored with countless kids to create like an environment that feels safe and non-threatening. But but I think using silence, and because sometimes I think we feel pressure to say the right thing or to know the right thing, and just saying, I'm here for you when you're ready to talk, and I can see that something's going on, and that is huge. And then for teenagers, there's actually you can text home to 741-741, and it connects you with a trained professional, and it's all over text. It's anonymous. Sometimes for teenagers in particular, that can be helpful because they don't have to talk to someone. I mean, that doesn't have to be for suicidal ideation. It can be for any time that they're in emotional distress, so that can be helpful.
So 741-741.
Yes.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
Good. That's
How
great.
many is that?
It's a great resource, and some of you guys that are in ministry know this. I mean, sitting with somebody, we get uncomfortable. Even in our churches, man, we don't want silence. People get uncomfortable in silence, or we feel. I'm glad you brought it up. Sometimes we feel this pressure that we have to fix things, but just being present with somebody speaks volumes. If you know the story of Job from the Bible, he lost everything. And then he's sitting there, and his friends were great up until they opened up their mouth. As long as they just sat there, they were great. When they started talking is when everything went south. We need people to sit with us.
And in all seriousness, long before I was comfortable speaking, and I didn't even know that I was doing this when I was a kid, I would draw to express what I was feeling, because I don't really understand emotions. Hence the don't ask me how I feel, because I really hate that question. Some of you know that better than others. But if you look around the room, especially in some of these different masks or some of the photos behind us, these are all the masks especially were created to express different feelings that I was trying to express that I couldn't find words for. A lot of the photos behind me are images that are in my head, because I think primarily in image. And so it was easier for me to try to tell the story through an image. In fact, if you go to the back, there is a binder that's Breaking Point. That was the first photo essay I did, because I wanted to share my suicide attempt story in a way that I was comfortable with, and that was long before I talked to people. Ask questions, don't be afraid. Like right now.
I think one of the things that was said that I don't think gets expressed enough is you feel pressure to say the right thing. There's not a right thing to say. Like, relieve yourself of that pressure. There's nothing like right or wrong. It's just being there. Having my own story in this vein as a teenager, just having people there, and you expressed yourself through, and you dealt with a lot of your stuff through art. I did most of mine through writing, and I did a lot of poetry at that age, and you can tell what I was going through the poetry that I wrote. There is no right thing. It's just being a friend, being somebody that's there.
And I think a lot of times, like, when you're sharing hardness with people, they feel like they have to comfort you and say, it's fine, it's going to be okay, you're going to get through it. I had this friend who had these things, and like, they're cool now. And there's like big value in saying, that sucks.
Yes.
It's like,
Absolutely.
your life sounds really hard. That must be hard for you. And I have no idea what to say to you right now. But that really sucks. It's huge, because we don't hear that. We hear that, at least you don't have cancer, or, at least you're not, whatever we invalidate people so often unintentionally. So even as a therapist, sometimes when people come in, and especially an intake where they're telling me like their whole life story, it's really helpful, I have found, to be like, wow, you went through like a lot of crap. What was that like for you? Because they don't hear that. Like, we minimize people a lot on accident.
In that same vein, please know that if you have not been there, you do not understand.
Yes. So I take back there is a wrong thing to say.
Yes,
I know what you're going through. No, you really don't.
if you have never actively tried to end your own life, you do not know what that feels like,
Exactly.
and I hope you never knew. If you have never had the thoughts, and there's a difference between having the thoughts and the plans and holding the pills in your hand, contemplating, okay, am I going to swallow this, and actively taking the pills, swallowing them, and then trying to get beer down.
You really wanted to end it if you were going to drink beer.
Exactly. I don't drink. It's just, oh, the taste is still there. 12 years later. But seriously, if you've never been there, you can't understand what it's like. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to go to a training for a suicide attempt survivor support group. And you had to have survived an attempt. Not just the thoughts, but actually have survived an attempt in order to be a part of this group. Because they didn't want to, if you've only, like I said, if you've only had the thoughts, that's hard enough. And I'm not going to discount that. But when you breach that barrier and you actively try to end your own life, it changes the way you look at things. And I sincerely hope nobody in this room understands what I'm talking about. Because it sucks.
Are there any other questions that you would like to ask the panel? Thoughts, anything?
I have a question for Matt.
Okay, go for it.
So Matt, what happens when someone doesn't have a support system and they call the crisis line and the crisis line is less than helpful and it gets escalated and then someone in a uniform gets sent out? How do you handle that differently than you would if it was a family member or somebody that was calling?
So the question is, if I'm called to a person in crisis case and there's no social support network, and there's no other resources for me to rely upon, how do I get that person help?
This is actually based off of a real experience that I had a few years ago. I called the crisis line because I was struggling with the urge to cut. I was in my car, the razors were in my glove compartment, and I refused to take them out, which caused the call to get escalated up, and then Cobb County Sheriff's Department got called. Thankfully, they called Larry at like 2 o'clock in the morning and he was kind enough to come out, but it could have ended a lot differently. So if you're getting a call not from the crisis line like GCAL, as opposed to someone calling that has a relationship, how does that change for you?
You know, it really doesn't change the way I respond to the call, whether it's reported from a completely unknown concerned citizen, a family member, or Georgia Mobile Crisis, or whatever agency it's reported through. It doesn't change my response to the call, because I still go through, I have like a checklist in my head that I'm like, okay, how can I help? What are my resources available? What resources best apply? And it doesn't really matter where the call comes from, I guess is what I'm saying, is I'm still going to treat every call the same. I will say on some occasions there has been times where, you know, as a police officer, anybody inside the borders of the United States, whether they're a legal alien, someone who's experiencing a mental health crisis, someone who's been diagnosed with mental health issues, everybody has the same rights. And as a police officer, I'm assigned to protect them rights. So sometimes it sucks for me because I'll come into contact with someone who is genuinely experiencing a crisis, and they don't want help.
So it really helps to get a really good idea of what's going on, so that you can create a treatment plan with your client, to start kind of problem solving together. If this is what's stressing you out, what can we do to kind of take some of those stressors away? So I wanted to share that. I don't really have any other final words other than I appreciate being included.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to go to Sergeant Mead and let you share just any final thoughts.
I know Chief Westenberger is very, very adamant and makes it a point to make sure that every single officer in the Kennesaw Police Department gets through the crisis intervention training. That program is put on and free to the officers through NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Health and Illness.
It's just
We love the acronyms.
Yeah.
Yeah, the acronyms. She mentioned EMDR earlier. That I don't know what that exactly stands for. It's like eye movement,
Desensitization,
something like that or other. But they're even bringing that into law enforcement now with interrogations. Totally forgot what I was talking about. But yeah, the training that we received from NAMI is phenomenal, and I think that our chief at the city of Kennesaw really takes pride in the fact that we try to go out and build relationships within our community, and I'm proud to be a member of the Kennesaw Police Department. So, and thank you guys for having me on this panel tonight. I'll leave some information over here at the table. There's some vote cards and some crisis line cards, and if you need to reach out to me, I'll leave my email as well too.
All right, thank you, Heather.
There's a few things I want to wrap up with because I think they're important. One of them is there is a new 3-digit number that will connect you to the crisis line, and it's only been, a couple months?
Yeah, look, 2 months.
988. It will connect you to GCAL. It's a lot easier to remember than the 800 number, and they fought long and hard to get that legislation passed. So 988 instead of 911. Although I will tell you that if I'm going to have a crisis, it's going to be in Kennesaw. And you think I'm kidding. One of the other things I want to share is to remember that language is important. Our words are important. And I held my tongue for as long as I could. Do not use the word suffer when you are talking about somebody living with a mental illness, unless you're talking about yourself. And even then, I'm going to challenge you to use the word struggle. Suffer means that you are allowing the situation to occur, that you're complacent with it. Struggle means that you are actively working to improve your situation. I do not suffer from mental illness. I suffer from other things like Larry, but not mental illness.
That's legitimate. So,
And I do struggle some days more than others. And this last little bit is really important, and it goes back to what happened 12 years ago, and it fits into the language. If someone comes to you and tells you they are thinking about ending their life, they are contemplating death, any of that, take it seriously. Do not tell them that they're being manipulative. Do not say it's attention-seeking behavior. Stop playing games. Because even if that's what it is, there is a reason that they're doing that. If they're looking for attention that way, there is some need that is not being met. And we need to stop treating people like they are less than human. And we need to take every threat or statement seriously, even if it means that they end up in the hospital, which I would never say that lightly. And anybody that has known me for any length of time knows that I have had a lot of traumatic experiences that have occurred in hospitals. I was 16 the first time I was hospitalized at the state hospital in Georgia. And I am beyond thankful that those places have been shut down. Because they really do treat you like you're less than human. You probably have less rights in a psych hospital than you do in a jail. Matt, you can attest to that, yes?
No. I moved to Georgia long after all them places that shut down, so.
But just really stop and think about that. Think about the words that you're using. And the reason that Larry said his brother died by suicide instead of committed suicide, this is important. We don't commit cancer. We don't commit heart attacks. So why are we telling people that they committed suicide? Committing means that you committed a crime. And there is a history to it. Suicide in a lot of states is a crime. It is a criminal act. When in reality, it is simply an act of desperation.
So that's
Because-
symptom of depression.
Pretty much. I mean, honestly, it could be any number of things. And please realize that we're never going to have a zero suicide rate. It's great to aspire to that, but it's never going to happen. I wish that it would. I also wish I was 6'5", but that's beside the point. Know that if you do everything that you can to help someone, it's not your fault. But take it seriously. And if you know someone that is struggling and is going through stuff and they end up in the hospital and they get out, one of the most harmful things that was said to me 12 years ago, and I was still in the hospital, was when I talked to someone on the phone and they told me, I'm not mad at you because I know this time was real. And that still stings. Because guess what? Every other time was real too. I just didn't try. I didn't push myself as hard, and that's the other thing to realize is that if someone has a history of attempts, the next attempt is probably going to go up higher because they don't want to deal with it. So they're going to try harder to make it last, to work, or whatever word you want to use.
Thank you, Heather. And I really appreciate everyone's time that's up here. And I appreciate all of you coming out. This is something that we really wanted to do annually. We did one of these a couple years ago. But it's obviously the last couple of years, I think we erased time for a little bit. But this is something we want to do annually, and I'm going to brag on Heather for just a minute. Heather, with the mental health issues that she's had over the years, really wants to help people break some of the stigma she's worked with and actually shared at your office before some ways for you guys to be able to help with people that struggle with mental health. With Sergeant Meade, when he was over the Explorers program, talked to the Explorers about how they do that. So use Heather. Like I said, we do a podcast. We talk about a lot of these things, her and I. This will probably end up on a podcast in the next few months. So I want to encourage you with that. I'm going to give one last thing, just from a parent to those of you that are out there. I know a lot of times when we have kids, we look at what they do and we think it's kind of strange and different things. Don't be afraid to take time to spend with your kids, even if what they do is not something you're into. Encourage them and celebrate them where they're at. Obviously, if it's self-destructive, things like that, you've got lines, you've got boundaries, you know what those are. But try and encourage your kids where they're at and build a relationship with them so that you're not blindsided when issues pop up and you had no idea. We've checked out. We've let schools and sports and everything else parent our kids, and we haven't been involved. So get involved. And for our elderly, you know, you talked about feeling lost in a psych ward. People that end up in assisted living and in places like that, they feel like they're forgotten forever. So let's remember those that are out there that maybe don't have the same opportunities to build relationships, and let's build those relationships. Thank you again for spending time there. And this is my shameless plug for Heather. Heather paid for this out of her own pocket. If you feel compelled to, there's a little basket back on the table. Man, drop a few bucks in to help curb some of the expenses of this. She's that passionate about this that she wanted to do this out of her own pocket. This is something that she's passionate about. She has books back there. She sells them. She had them published. If you want to buy one of those are available. Support her in those things. I appreciate you being here. Have a safe and great evening. Thank you.